11:47 p.m. The 14th of October, 1963. Lenox Avenue behind the steamed-up. Glass of Savoy Deli. Harlem, a bell jingled like it was tired. Then the delivery kid set the basket down on the counter, like it weighed too much for fruit. Cellophane caught the fluorescent light and threw it back in cold shards. Red ribbon gold card stock, the kind of thing that looks like apology. The note was tucked under the pears. Bumpy Johnson didn't reach for it right away. He let it sit there and breathe, like a snake pretending to be a belt. The deli's back room hummed with the refrigerator motor somewhere. A train rattled under the street. A man at the table stopped mid. Domino like he'd heard a gun that never fired. Bumpy slid the card out with 2 fingers. Read one line and didn't blink. Freeze that, because the room had that feeling, the air going thin, eyes going sharp, like the city itself had leaned closer to listen. And the question wasn't who sent it. The question was, why would anybody be bold enough to send it now? The card smelled faintly of cologne and printer ink. One line typed clean, no signature. Enjoy the fruit. Keep the core. Bumpy read it again, slow. Then he folded the card once, perfectly, like he was putting away a handkerchief. Little Leon, his runner, maybe 19 and too fast for his own good, swallowed hard. Bump. That's supposed to mean what? Leon asked, voice cracking on the last word. Bumpy finally looked up. His eyes were calm, which was worse than anger. It means somebody thinks I'm stupid, Bumpy said. Miss Odessa, the numbers queen who'd been old when Bumpy was young, let out a laugh that sounded like coins sliding in a drawer. Baby, she said, in Harlem, a gift is just a weapon in a ribbon. Ruthie Caldwell, a newspaper woman with ink-stained fingers and a conscience that wouldn't sit down, leaned forward. Who's playing polite? She asked. Bumpy didn't answer her first. He reached into the basket and lifted the pear on top. Perfect skin. No bruise, no blemish. And then he turned it. Stamped on the underside, in faint purple, like a secret kiss, chambers only. The men at the table stopped breathing. That was the mistake, because chambers only wasn't a florist's joke. It was courthouse language. It was backroom language. It was the kind of phrase that said, I have access, you don't. Bumpy set the pear down gently. 72 hours, he said. Not loud, not proud. Just final. Leon blinked. 72 hours for what? Bumpy's voice stayed even. For them to learn the difference between an offering and an insult. Outside, a car door shut too soft. Tires whispered away. And somewhere across the neighborhood, a man who loved mirrors more than truth was probably smiling into one. They didn't realize one thing. Bumpy's real power wasn't a gun. It wasn't a fist. It wasn't even fear. It was access to people, to paperwork, to the invisible levers that made the city nod yes or shake its head. No, Harlem was a kingdom, built on storefronts and stairwells and the smell of fried onions. It was also a pipeline, money up, pressure down, and if you knew where the pipeline ran, you could pinch it until the whole block noticed. The villains knew that too. Captain Horace Duffy wore his badge like it was a sermon. His tell was the way he tapped it twice with his thumbnail when he lied, and the way he said the word procedure like it meant permission. Procedure, Captain Duffy would say, smiling with his mouth, not his eyes. The shadow behind him was a man Harlem only knew as Mr. Vellum, because he loved paper and hated fingerprints. He wore pale gloves in warm weather, and his tell was his cufflinks. He smoothed them every time he was about to ruin somebody's life. Let's be reasonable, Mr. Vellum would say, and the room would get colder. And the on-scene muscle, that was Brickardina's. Shoulders like a wardrobe, toothpick always working the corner of his mouth. His tell was simple. He never raised his voice. He just leaned in and said, you heard him. Those 3 had been leaning on Harlem for months. Not with headlines, with visits, with inspections, with lost forms and late paperwork, with police cars idling outside barber shops like a warning. A city doesn't choke you with a hand, it chokes you with forms. A week earlier, they'd taken a kid named Calvin Little Cal, Ricks off the street for loitering. He'd been carrying groceries for his mother. Captain Duffy called it vagrancy control. The courthouse called it a hold. Harlem called it theft. Bumpy had tried to pull the usual strings: quiet calls, quiet favors, quiet money. But this time, the string snapped, because every door he knocked on had the same new bolt on it. Chambers' only that stamp wasn't just on fruit. It was on Calvin's file, on a landlord's eviction notice, on a liquor license denial, on a tax lien that came out of nowhere. It was a signature without ink, a system flexing. And now, somebody had the nerve to send it into Bumpy's own room like a joke. Leon's eyes darted to the window. "We should move," he whispered. Ruthie's voice was low. "If this is coming from the courthouse, we're talking bigger than a patrol captain." Miss Odessa wagged a finger. "Baby, the courthouse is just the church. Somebody always paying for the choir." Bumpy stood. His chair scraped the tile with a sound like a match striking. He looked at the basket again and smiled, small and sharp. "Leon," he said, "go see Eddie. Eddie Glassmarin used to be NYPD before his conscience got him fired and his eyes got him tired. He still had friends in buildings where doors clicked a certain way when you knew the right name." Leon nodded fast. "Yes, sir." Bumpy turned to Ruthie. "You still got that editor who hates being embarrassed?" Ruthie lifted her chin. "He hates it more than he hates me." "Good," Bumpy said. "Tell him to keep a page open." Miss Odessa leaned back. "And what you gon' do, Bump?" Bumpy tucked the note into his pocket like it was a receipt. "I'm going to open the fruit," he said, "and I'm going to show them the core. Whore one." Leon ran down the metal stairs, the kind that screamed under your feet no matter how quiet you tried to be. The night air smelled like bus exhaust and roasted peanuts from a corner cart still refusing to quit. He reached Eddie's place above a tire shop where the hallway light flickered like it was nervous. Eddie opened the door with one eye first, like he'd been waiting for trouble. "What you want?" Eddie asked. Leon held up the stamped pear wrapped in a napkin. Eddie's face changed. Not fear, recognition. "Where'd you get that?" Eddie said. Leon swallowed. "It came to Bumpy." Eddie didn't take it. He looked past Leon, down the hallway. "Listen," Eddie said, voice thin. "You got a tail." Leon's heart punched his ribs. At the far end of the corridor, Brick Cardenas stepped out from the shadow like he'd been carved there. Toothpick, slow smile. "You heard him," Brick said softly. Leon's hands started to shake. "I'm just delivering fruit," he tried. Brick took one step closer. "Ain't nobody delivering fruit at midnight to Eddie Glass." Eddie moved between them without raising his voice. "Brick," Eddie said, "you're in the wrong hallway." Brick's eyes stayed on Leon. "Nah," he murmured. "I'm in the right one." Leon felt the corridor tighten. "Freeze that. Because this is where boys become men. Or become missing." Eddie held up a palm, calm as Sunday. "Brick," Eddie said, "if you put hands on this kid, you'll have 3 different captains calling your name by morning. Not because they like him, because they'll want to know why you got loud in their quiet." Brick chewed the toothpick. Slow, then he smiled like he'd decided something. "Tell Bumpy," Brick said. "The basket was a courtesy." Leon found his voice small but honest. That note wasn't courtesy. Brick's smile didn't move. "That's the point." And then he stepped back into the dark like he'd never existed. Eddie shut the door and locked it twice. Leon exhaled like he'd been underwater. Eddie looked at him hard. "They testing your perimeter," he said. "They want you scared." Leon nodded, breath ragged. "Bumpy ain't scared." Eddie's mouth twitched. I know. Her editor, a thick-necked man named Hal, stared at her over a folded newspaper like it was a shield. You're telling me a decorated captain is running a courthouse stamp like it's his personal brand, Hal said. Ruthie slid a napkin across the table. On it, she'd pressed the faint purple mark she'd lifted off the pear. Hal's face tightened. That says Chambers only, he muttered. Ruthie leaned in. And it's showing up on Harlem paperwork like a curse. People getting squeezed with no explanation. Hal scoffed. You got proof. Ruthie didn't blink. I will today. Hal shook his head, but his eyes had that hungry look men get when they smell a story that can't be ignored. You embarrass the courthouse, Hal said. They'll bury you. Ruthie's voice went flat. They've been burying people with paper for years. Hal stared, then exhaled. 1 page, he said. Bring me something I can print without dying. Ruthie stood up. Bring an extra page, she said, and left him with his coffee cooling into bitterness. Horror 18. Bumpy moved through Harlem like he owned the sidewalks. Not because he did, but because people acted like he did. A nod here, a hand on the shoulder there, a quiet word at a bodega counter. A street proverb floated behind him like smoke. A man with keys don't need fists, but keys can be stolen. And by evening, Captain Duffy made his move. A uniformed officer stepped into Savoy Deli and smiled too wide. Mr. Johnson, the officer said, eyes flicking around. Captain Duffy requests your presence procedure. Bumpy looked up from his coffee, unbothered. Requests, Bumpy repeated. The officer swallowed. Strongly. Miss Odessa, in the corner, clicked her tongue. Bumpy stood and straightened his cuffs. Tell your captain, Bumpy said. I'll come see him when I'm done drinking my coffee. The officer's smile slipped. Now would be better. Bumpy took a slow sip, then placed the cup down with care. Better for who? Bumpy asked. The officer hesitated. The fluorescent lights buzzed like gossip. Bumpy leaned in just enough for the officer to smell the coffee on his breath. Here's a proverb for you, Bumpy said quietly. When a man says procedure, check his pockets. The officer's cheeks flushed. He backed out like the room had teeth. Miss Odessa grinned without joy. They gone tighten, she said. Bumpy nodded. Good, he replied. Let them. Day 2. The proof wasn't going to walk into their hands. They had to go take it. Not with guns, with timing, with eyes, with the kind of patience that makes impatient men sloppy. Eddie led them to the courthouse after hours, to a service entrance that smelled like mop water and old stone. A janitor's radio whispered baseball into the dark. You didn't hear this from me, Eddie muttered, pushing a door that didn't squeak. There's a records room where certain files spend the night. Ruthie's heels clicked once, and she winced like it was a gunshot. Shoes, Eddie hissed. Ruthie slipped them off, holding them like contraband. Leon hovered behind them, jittery. I don't like this, Leon whispered. Miss Odessa glided like she'd been born in hallways that didn't belong to her. Baby, she murmured. Ain't nothing in this city belong to you until you touch it. They reached a metal door with a simple sign. Records. Eddie produced a key. He didn't explain. The lock turned. Inside, rows of shelves, dust, paper, the scent of ink and neglect. And on a small table, like it was waiting for somebody who thought they owned it, sat a black ledger. Not a normal ledger. This one was wrapped in hymn book leather, cracked at the spine, like somebody wanted it to look holy, stamped on the cover, in purple, quiet fund, and right through one of the names visible on the first page. A cigarette burn punched a perfect hole. A memory hook you couldn't forget if you tried, Ruthie whispered. Oh my God. Leon reached for it. Don't, Eddie snapped too loud. Footsteps in the hallway. A flashlight beam slid under the door like a knife. Rear cords is off limits, a voice called out. Too casual to be a janitor. Captain Duffy's voice, and his tell followed it. 2 taps of a thumbnail on metal. Tap. Tap. Procedure, Duffy called, amused. Leon's face went white. We're trapped. Miss Odessa didn't panic. She opened her purse and pulled out a thick scarf like she'd packed it for weather. She wrapped the ledger in it, fast. Ruthie grabbed a loose stack of blank forms off the table and dropped them, scattering paper like snow. A distraction. A mess. A delay. Eddie hissed. Back door now. They slipped out through a side exit into a narrow stairwell that smelled like rust. The second complication hit like a hand on your shoulder. 2 uniformed officers were waiting at the bottom, not regular cops, the kind with hard eyes and no curiosity. Evenin, one said, stepping forward. Hand over what you took. Leon clutched the scarf bundle tighter. His mouth opened. Maybe to lie, maybe to beg. And then he did something worse. He glanced at the officers' badges and looked tempted. Because one of them leaned in and whispered, "You help us, kid, we make you clean. You walk away, you hear me? That's how institutions recruit their favorites, promise them safety from the fire they started." Leon's fingers loosened on the scarf. Miss Odessa's voice snapped like a ruler on knuckles. "Leon!" Leon blinked. The officer smiled. "He's thinking smart." Bumpy wasn't there, but his rule was. Miss Odessa stepped close to Leon's ear, soft and deadly. "Never sell your shield to the same hand swinging the stick," she whispered. Leon's eyes refocused. Shame washed over his face. He tightened his grip. "No," he said, voice shaking. "No deal." The officer's smile died. He reached for the bundle. Eddie shifted, just a step, placing his body between the officer and Leon. "Don't," Eddie said, quiet. The officer scoffed. "Or what?" Eddie's gaze didn't move. "Or you explain to your captain why the quiet fund ledger ended up in a stairwell with witnesses." Ruthie lifted her chin. "And a reporter," she added. Silence thickened. The officers didn't want noise. They wanted compliance. They couldn't afford a scene. That was the leverage. One officer cursed under his breath. "Go," he spat, jerking his head toward the exit. "Get outta here." They moved fast down the last flight into the night air. Behind them, the courthouse swallowed its own footsteps. Har 52. Bumpy sat at a table with the ledger open, the fluorescent buzz above him, sounding like a hive. He didn't grin. He didn't celebrate. He read names, judges, clerks, donations, consulting, quiet, and there, written with casual cruelty, Calvin Ricks, hold Fay leverage. Ruthie's hands trembled. "They're using a kid like a chip." Leon stared at the cigarette burn hole through a name and whispered, "Who smokes like that?" Eddie pointed with a knuckle. "Duffy. He burns through cigarettes when he thinks." Miss Odessa sighed. "Baby, the city ain't run on laws. It run on who oh who." Bumpy closed the ledger, slow. "Tomorrow," he said. Ruthie frowned. "Tomorrow what?" Bumpy looked at the stamped pair still sitting on the counter like a dare. "Tomorrow," he said, "we go where their stamp matters. Har 68. The courthouse smelled like wet coats and old fear. The hallway outside courtroom 3B was packed. Not just Harlem folks. Not just lawyers, clerks. Union men. A couple of off-duty cops with eyes sharp, pretending they weren't watching. Ruthie's editor, Hal, stood near the wall, pale, holding folded pages like they were live wires. "You got me killed," Hal murmured. Ruthie didn't look away. "You wanted a story," Hal swallowed. "I wanted ink, not a funeral." Captain Duffy arrived with a smile, and that badge, tap, tap, tap. "Procedure," he said, like a greeting. Brick Cardenas stood behind him, toothpick working. "You heard him," Brick added, soft, and then Mr. Vellum slid into view. Gloved hands, cufflinks catching the courthouse light. He smoothed them once. "Let's be reasonable," Mr. Vellum said, like he was offering mercy. Bumpy stepped forward, dressed plain, face unreadable. Captain Duffy chuckled. "Mr. Johnson, here to watch justice." Bumpy's voice was calm. "I'm here to watch paper." Mr. Vellum's smile was thin. "Paper is delicate," he said. "It tears. It burns. It disappears." Bumpy held Vellum's gaze. "In this town," Bumpy said, "paper don't disappear. It just changes hands." Brick shifted. A half step forward. "You want to take a walk?" Brick murmured, almost polite. Bumpy didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. He just looked at Brick, like Brick was furniture. "No," Bumpy said. "I want to go inside." The courtroom doors opened, and the ticking clock tightened. Hour 71, Calvin Little Cal Ricks was brought in looking smaller than a kid should ever look. Wrists raw from cuffs, eyes searching the room like he didn't trust it to hold him. His mother sat in the back with her mouth pressed shut so she wouldn't cry out loud. The judge, Judge Mallory Crane, a woman with tired eyes, took the bench like she wanted the day to end without complication. The prosecutor started talking fast, like speed could turn wrong into right. Captain Duffy stood near the wall, watching. Mr. Vellum sat behind the prosecutor, like a shadow with cufflinks. Brick leaned against a pillar, toothpick smile. Ruthie's editor Hal clutched his papers. Miss Odessa sat still as a statue. Bumpy stood in the aisle, hands empty. The prosecutor said, "The defendant was found loitering." Bumpy spoke, one sentence. "Your Honor," he said, "that hold is in the quiet fund." The room did that thing, air thinning, eyes sharpening. Judge Crane blinked. "Mr. Johnson, you are not counsel." Bumpy nodded once. "No, ma'am." Captain Duffy smiled. "Tap, tap procedure," he whispered. Mr. Vellum smoothed his cufflinks. "Let's be reasonable," he murmured. Brick's toothpick paused. "You heard him," Brick breathed. Bumpy didn't answer any of them. He reached into a plain paper bag, nothing fancy, nothing dramatic, and pulled out the ledger wrapped in hymn book leather. The purple stamp caught the courtroom light. Quiet fund. Freeze that. Because the reaction was immediate and visible, the kind that turns into legend. The prosecutor's coffee cup tipped and spilled across his own notes, brown streaks blooming like guilt. Judge Crane grabbed for her gavel and hit the block, the sound cracking wrong. A clerk in the corner went still, like her body forgot how to move. Mr. Vellum's gloved hand froze mid, cufflink smooth. Captain Duffy's smile twitched, then vanished. Brick stopped chewing. No big speech, just a few lines, mechanically undeniable. Bumpy set the ledger on the rail. "Open it," Bumpy said softly. The judge stared. "Is that?" Ruthie's voice cut in, sharp. "It's stamped, it's logged, and it matches holds like this one." Hal stepped forward, shaking, and held up a newspaper proof sheet. "We go to print today," he said, voice cracking. "Front page." Captain Duffy's voice rose, just a notch. "Your Honor, that's evidence. Seize that." Judge Crane's eyes snapped to him. "Captain," she said, cold, "you will sit down." Captain Duffy didn't sit. Judge Crane leaned forward. "Now." Brick's jaw tightened. Mr. Vellum's smile was gone entirely, and Bumpy didn't move. Control beats shouting every time. Judge Crane opened the ledger with 2 fingers, like it might bite. She saw the cigarette. Burn hole, she saw the stamp. She saw the line, "Calvin Ricks, hold Fay Leverage." Her face changed. She looked up, voice flat. "Recess." The room exploded in whispers. Then, in footsteps. Captain Duffy reached for the ledger. Bumpy's hand came down on it. Not hard, not violent, just there, like a final period. "No," Bumpy said, Brick took a step. Bumpy looked at him, calm, and spoke the slower, meaner line. "Brick," he said, almost gentle, "if you touch this book, every door you ever walked through becomes a wall." Silence stretched. Brick's toothpick slid out of his mouth. He swallowed. And he stepped back. Har 72. It didn't end with a headline alone. It ended with a chain of consequences. Slow, believable, ugly. The courthouse tried to resist first. Of course it did. A supervisor attempted to misplaces the ledger. Judge Crane ordered it sealed. Captain Duffy called it stolen property. He tried to make procedure into a shield. Mr. Vellum offered reasonable solutions in private quiet deals, quiet threats, a quiet promise that Calvin would go home if everyone forgot what they saw. But public pressure is a weight institutions can't bench. Press forever. Ruthie had names ready, Hal printed anyway. Miss Odessa had witnesses who didn't scare easy. Eddie had a former colleague willing to testify that the stamp wasn't official. Because it was personal. Corroboration, noise, leverage. So the institution yielded, not out of goodness, but out of survival. Calvin walked out that afternoon, blinking in daylight like it was new. His mother grabbed him and cried into his shoulder, and no amount of courtroom power could make that look wrong. Captain Duffy got transferred, not fired, not jailed. The system protects its own. Until it can't. He landed behind a desk far from Harlem, where procedure couldn't reach the same throats. Mr. Vellum lost something worse than money. He lost access. The councilman who used to answer his calls stopped picking up. The courthouse doors that used to open for him suddenly had rules. His cufflinks still shined, but nobody looked at them with fear anymore. Brick Cardenas, he didn't get handcuffed on camera. He got something more Harlem than punishment. He got avoided. Men stopped meeting his eyes. Stores stopped extending credit. Even the corners felt colder around him, because reputation is a currency, and he'd been seen backing the wrong bank. Bumpy didn't get crowned. He didn't get celebrated by newspapers. He got a friendly visit 2 nights later. 2 officers in plain clothes, standing outside Savoy Deli like a reminder. Miss Odessa received an eviction notice with her name misspelled on purpose. Ruthie found her apartment door jimmied, not entered, just touched enough to say, "We can." Idie's tire shop got inspected 3 times in 1 week. The cost came due, like it always does. And Bumpy paid it in the only way that makes sense in a city like this. Not with shouting, with steadiness, with favors returned and favors denied. With doors opening for the right people and slamming for the wrong ones. Because, here's the ugly truth, folks, don't like to say out loud justice and revenge share the same street. They just walk it with different shoes. Bumpy stood in the deli again, late, the basket still on the counter, fruit untouched. Leon hovered, guilt still living on his face. Leon started. Bumpy raised a hand, gentle. "You almost learned," Bumpy said. "That's different." Leon swallowed. "What do we do with the basket?" Bumpy picked up the pear with the faint stamp and turned it in his hand. Then he placed it back down. "We don't eat it," he said. Miss Odessa tilted her head. "Why not?" Bumpy's eyes stayed calm, voice low. "Because I want them to remember," he said, "that when they sent fruit into my house, they fed a war." Ruthie watched him, conflicted. "You did a good thing," she said. Bumpy looked at her like he'd heard that line before and never trusted it. "I did a necessary thing," he replied. "And that's the line," Harlem repeated, barbershop to stoop, like a proverb you don't want to need. In this city, a man ain't killed by bullets first, he's killed by permission. Bumpy leaned closer to the counter, eyes on the stamped pear. Then he said it soft, quotable, and mean in the cleanest way. "If you want to live clean, don't get dirty with paper. Paper remembers." That night, nobody in Harlem heard a gun. But everybody felt the shift. Because wars don't always start with a shot. Sometimes they start with a ribbon, a stamp, and one line you can't unread. And if you're still watching, you already know the moral. The city doesn't punish sin. It punishes weakness. And the only mercy you can count on is the mercy you can prove. So, here's what I want you to do. If you felt that centerpiece moment, the spill, the gavel, the silence, hit the like button like you're stamping it final. Subscribe if you want more stories where the power flips without a scream. And tell me in the comments, was Bumpy chasing justice, or was he sharpening revenge into something the courthouse couldn't dodge? Next time, we're going somewhere even colder, where a respected church fundraiser turns into a trap, and the only proof is a single signature that shouldn't exist. And once it shows up, everybody starts moving like they've got something to hide.